how you doing? Today I want to talk a little bit about some detective novels, some unique and offbeat detective novels. I'm going to talk about 4 of them. Some of these, maybe all of these, you'll have never heard of, most likely. I hope you'll find something interesting in these. So when I say offbeat or unique, again, these are in the amateur detective to, police procedural type. So they follow some, general outlines of that genre of mystery and detective fiction, where there's a crime and some people investigate it, whether they are members of law enforcement, as will be the case with, I believe, half of these, 2 of these. The other 2 are more amateur detective situations. So these are all older paperback editions, and I'm going to start with the first one, the oldest one, and that is A Taste for Honey by H.F. Hurd. And again, here we have an interesting back cover, and this is a Lancer Suspense Mystery Complete and Unabridged. This was published in 1964, this edition, but this book was published originally in 1941, and as you can tell, it's a Sherlock Holmes, perhaps, mystery. Now, I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, the original canon by Arthur Conan Doyle. I'm not a huge reader of the other kind of pastiche writing about Holmes and Watson, Sherlockiana, as it's sometimes referred to. I'm kind of hit or miss on that. I'm not really big on anything that's not the original. However, this novel, if you're going to read a pastiche or a riff on those great characters, this is the one to choose. This one really took me by surprise, and it was a lot of fun. Now, and it's got a very unique murder method. What is this about? Well, let me read you the back blurb. Murdered by bees. This is where the unusual or offbeat comes in. Method of crime, a method of murder is quite interesting in this. Who is Mr. Mycroft? Now, if those of you who are fans of Sherlock Holmes, you know that he has a brother named Mycroft Holmes who works in the upper echelons of Whitehall, and the British government sometimes calls Sherlock Holmes in to take a case to assist with the Queen and country. But so this is the tie-in, perhaps. Who is Mr. Mycroft? The true identity of this magnificent, inscrutable old gentleman is a deep secret. But there are echoes of Baker Street in his voice and a familiar gleam in his eyes that miss no clue. In A Taste for Honey, he meets one of the most sinister murderers of all time and encounters one of the most fiendishly ingenious murder methods ever devised. And this has a blurb from none other than the actor Boris Karloff, Frankenstein, Imhotep in the original The Mummy, tons of other horror movies, and straight mainstream movies. Very cultured gentleman in real life. I thought I knew all the tricks of the horror trade, but I never expected to have my hair stand on end when a bee flew in through an open window. So, and then Vincent Starrett, terrifying, perfectly done, the most original contribution to detective story literature in many years. And this is probably from when this novel first came out. Now, and a veritable triumph of modern mystery, packing plenty of horror, the New York Herald Tribune. Okay, so what is this about? Basically, there's a kind of reclusive, persnickety gentleman named Silchester, Mr. Silchester, who was moved to this country village in England, wanting just peace and quiet. But he's kind of addicted to honey. He likes honey with his breakfast of tea and crumpets or whatever. When his current source, or when his previous source of honey, Mrs. Haregrove, is found dead, all swollen and black, and under somewhat strange circumstances, he has to go looking for another purveyor of honey, and that's how he runs into this Mr. Mycroft. Now, Mr. Mycroft is a retired gentleman who living in the neighborhood of this village who also keeps bees. So Mr. Silchester, with the strong assistance of his new acquaintance and eventual friend, Mr. Mycroft, realizes that he is perhaps next on the list of to be murdered by another beekeeping aficionado in the neighborhood who holds serious grudges and has a particularly ingenious way to kill his enemies. And luckily for Mr. Silchester, Mr. Mycroft is around to come up with a way to perhaps turn the tables on this killer. And this is a very fun and interesting mystery, and pretty slim novel. H.F. Hurd wrote some interesting horror and supernatural short fiction as well. It's only 142 pages, again, a pretty small type, so it's probably a 50,000 word novel, but very enjoyable, very interesting plot. I wouldn't say there's a huge range of suspects. That's not really the point of this novel, but the point is, the burgeoning relationship between Mr. Silchester and Mr. Mycroft, and who is Mr. Mycroft, and how they're going to unearth this threat of killer bees, and stop this trail of violence that's being created by this perfidious individual. So very fun, highly recommend that. The next one, going chronologically, this edition was published in 1984, but this book, She Died Because, originally published in 1957 by Kenneth Hopkins. Now, not a lot is known about Kenneth Hopkins. From what I've gathered, he was a professor or researcher, scholar, who wrote a few spy novels under a different name. So this is basically a very fun and funny novel about a couple of bumbling, elderly, amateur sleuths, scholars, the musty, fusty, and very clueless Dr. William Blow, who I believe is 81 in this, and then his neighbor and good friend, Professor Gideon Mansipple, and who's only 79, and the sprier and ever so slightly more worldly of the two. Anyway, Dr. Blow is working on some monograph that he's working, some kind of esoteric life and times of some essayist from Victorian times or whatever, looking in his musty old tomes, and he realizes he's hungry. And, being the kind of absent-minded professor that of literature type, that he realizes, hey, where's my lunch? Usually my tea is brought to me by my housekeeper, Mrs. Solihill, and he names all of his past and present housekeepers Mrs. Solihill, just to keep them straight, regardless of what their name is. Anyway, he realizes he's not been fed, and he's wondering what's going on. He has kind of a regular schedule, and he's always working in his office, and Mrs. Solihill, his housekeeper, brings him his tea or his breakfast or whatever, and it hasn't happened today. And then he's going, is it Wednesday? She's usually off on Wednesday. And then he goes and sees her laying down on the floor of her room. He kind of hesitant to bother her because she's a live-in housekeeper. And then he sees, in a closer inspection, he sees a knife sticking out of her back, and she's obviously dead. So he calls his friend and neighbor, Professor Mansipple, who comes over. They have a cup of tea and discuss it. Then they call the police. Inspector Urry arrives, and all of a sudden the knife is no longer there in the corpse's back. Where did it go? Who is this woman? Is she really the Mrs. Solihill that was his housekeeper, or is she someone else? And Blow and Mansipple bumble their way through the case, much to the annoyance of the inspector who's trying to actually solve it. Very fun, very funny. This is the first of 3 Blow and Mansipple novels. I have the second book, Body Blow, covers barely hanging on this old edition. And again, these are from the Perennial Library. And I don't have the third one, which is Dead Against My Principles. I need to pick that up at some point. And they gradually move forward in age. So Mansipple is 79 in this one, She Died Because, and Blow is 81, and it goes to 82 and 80, 83 and 81, like that. So very fun. Sad that there were only 3 that were written. These are, like I said, comedic mysteries. And if you like that kind of thing, I mean, it's not like guffaw, pratfall, Three Stooges kind of humor. It's more sly, irony and wit and some bumbling but lovable elderly sleuth characters. Actually, Mansible's moderately sharp as the world goes, but Blow is completely clueless. So very fun. Highly recommend that. All right, now the next one is part of also part of a series of police procedurals, but they're all kind of strange, weird, offbeat, especially this first one, The Glass-Sided Ant's Nest. Now this won the Crime Writers Association Golden Dagger Award from the year it was published, which was 1968. And I have this, I believe, Ace Books edition. Yes, by Peter Dickinson. And I believe Peter Dickinson also wrote some science fiction novels, but check that out, that cover out. That's kind of an interesting cover. And this is a very cool and unusual mystery case. And pretty much all of the Superintendent Jimmy Pibble, that's the main detective character, all of his cases are quite strange. But like it says here, you'll see winner of the Golden Dagger Award, right? For Crime Novel of the Year by the Crime Writers Association in Britain, one of the 6 best mystery novels of the year by the Mystery Writers of America. It says USA in parentheses after America, which is rather unnecessary, I would say. Anyway, Ace Books, published in 1968. And let me read you the back of this. This is a very unusual case with a heavy anthropology or cultural anthropology element to it. So Ross MacDonald, the blurb is mostly from Ross MacDonald, famous author of the Lou Archer novels, okay? And this gives you a little idea of the plot. Ross MacDonald writes of The Glass-Sided Ant's Nest. Peter Dickinson has turned in a highly original first performance. The Ant's Nest of his title is a tribe of New Guinea Aborigines transported more or less intact to London, where their chief is murdered. Their observer and investigator, Superintendent Pibble of Scotland Yard, is a man of refreshing intelligence. Mr. Dickinson's anthropological invention and sociological wit, his humanness persisting stubbornly in the teeth of our instantaneous McLuhan world, I'm not quite sure of the reference, McLuhan world, give his novel real distinction. And some other quotes, it's a most original plot with a solution to match. I can't recall a situation so strange or an unfolding so suspenseful. Philadelphia News writes, as unusual and charming a whodunit as you are likely to come upon this year. And the Oklahoma City Oklahoman sums it all up. It could easily be the best mystery of the year. Anyway, Detective Jimmy Pibble is a very interesting detective. He eventually gathers, maybe from this case and some subsequent ones, which I have several more of in the series. There are probably 10 or a dozen of them written, from what I can tell. He starts to become looked at as the man in Scotland Yard to assign the oddball, weird, unusual, bizarre cases. And some of them are more espionage or gangster crime focused occasionally, but they're all quite strange. And that makes them very fresh and original. And this one is probably the most original. There are some white people and some black Aborigine people, of course, involved as suspects. The Glass-Sided Ant's Nest refers to, those old ant farms. We would call them an ant farm, not an ant's nest, where you can see the goings on from the glass, behind the scenes, so to speak, of the ants' world. In this case, this is the self-contained dwellings in the city, I believe it's in London, where these New Guinea, I believe it's Papua New Guinea, Aboriginal tribes people, men and women, as well as the scientists studying them, etc., reside. And Pibble has to find out who murdered this chief and what was the motivation. And it leads to a pretty exciting and suspenseful climax where Pibble himself is in quite a bit of danger. Very cool book. Like I said, there are several others I have of his. Here's one from the Mysterious Press, The Seals. I don't believe this has anything to do with actual seals, but and then I haven't read that one. I have read this one, The Lizard in the Cup, which is, I believe, set is it somewhere in Greece? Yeah, some island in the Peloponnesian Peninsula of Greece, and there's a kind of a crime lord hanging out, a rich crime lord who asks Jimmy Pibble to look into something for him, who seems to be there on holiday, and gets involved in this. Pibble gets involved in this case of, is someone trying to kill this former crime lord, and all his hangers-on and drug dealing, etc. going on. That's quite good. Another one I have that's a Jimmy Pibble one, Superintendent Pibble of Scotland Yard, is The Old English Peep Show. And this one is from Pantheon Books, New York. This one is about an English manor house that's been turned into kind of a safari park, and then a body ends up mauled by a lion, and what's going on there. Now, this one is also by Peter Dickinson, but it's not a Jimmy Pibble. This is a very strange sounding one that I haven't read. This is The Poison Oracle, and you can tell from the chimpanzee on there. Chimpanzee is apparently one of the detectives in this situation. Sounds quite strange. Like I said, I've only read the Glass-Sided's Ant's Nest and The Lizard in the Cup. I haven't read these other ones, but I'm going to read this one pretty soon because it sounds really wacky. Monkey See, a royal assassination in the oil-rich Sultanate of Kukut draws British psycholinguist Wesley Morris into a baffling clash between advanced civilization and Aboriginal superstition. And somewhere between Oxford, England, and the heart of a medieval Arab kingdom, a Japanese airliner is skyjacked, a beautiful terrorist develops a fatal passion, and a pre-verbal chimpanzee named Dinah becomes the world's most unlikely detective, as Morris teaches her to communicate using plastic symbols. Monkey see, monkey tell. Anyway, as you can tell, Peter Dickinson, quite an imagination, has a particular fondness for looking at different cultures clashing with the traditional British culture. Very wry, well-observed writing, very good. Now, the last one I want to talk about is another police procedural series. I only have the first one. This is an 8-book series written by James McClure, and this is The Steam Pig. Now, this is a Kramer and Zondi novel or mystery. Kramer and Zondi mystery. Now, who are Kramer and Zondi? Well, The Steam Pig was published in 1971 by James McClure. James McClure was an Englishman who, I guess, moved to South Africa and became, I believe, in Natal, the Natal region, and he became a crime reporter during the Apartheid era. And this is set during the Apartheid era in a fictional town called Drakensberg, a fictional city, but it's really gritty, interesting, setting and atmosphere to this book. So I believe it's Lieutenant Tromp Kramer. He's an Afrikaner, which means, from the Boer or Dutch settlers in South Africa who were, again, being white. He's in the upper echelon in this apartheid society. And he has an unlikely partnership with a Bantu detective sergeant named Mickey Zondi. Even though there's this strict class distinction that's, part of this awful apartheid regime that was lasting for so long in South Africa during that time. This was written in 1971, so it's right in the heart of that. Mickey Zondi, the Bantu black man, can't interview a white suspect, and generally, although I'm sure it was done, Kramer, the white lieutenant, usually would stick to the white suspects. Anyway, together they have a kind of fun, that's one of the chief things in this series, it seems like, is the fun relationship between these two men of different classes and different races, and how they get along and work together to solve the mystery. There were 7 more written. I don't have any of those. I have ordered the second one because I want to check it out. But this one also won the CWA Award, Crime Writers Award, in 1971, much like the Glass-Sided Ant's Nest won in its year, 1968. So let me talk a little bit about this, the blurb on the back to talk about what the case entails. Murder with a bicycle spoke, a technique perfected by Bantu gangs. All quite simple if you have the stomach for it. Dr. Stridham explained. You take your spoke and slide it in here between the 3rd and 4th rib. It looks like a flea bite. Therese Leroux was a pretty young music teacher who gave very private lessons. But for a mix-up at the undertaker's, no one would have known she had been murdered. In their first case, Kramer and Zondi come up with some tantalizing clues that include extraordinary whispered references to, quote, the steamed pig. But what on earth can it mean? And this is a Faber and Faber London edition, published in 1988. And this is I had read about this series before I got it. I finally came across this one in Thailand in a bookshop on one of my vacations there, back when I first moved to Japan in the early 2000s or mid 2000 aughts, and read it and loved it. And I don't know why I never tried to track the other ones down. They're at the time they were hard to find. Maybe they're easier to find now. And this is a being a crime reporter, an actual crime reporter at the time. The author, James McClure, knew his stuff. He knew the different kinds of societal things that were going on, for good or ill, mostly ill, in South Africa at that time. And it gives it a real gritty, lived-in feel to this South African mystery. So again, another unusual and interesting detective or mystery book. Anyhow, I hope you found one of those titles perhaps interesting, and I appreciate you watching, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you very much.